There. Good. It's called a tragedy, but actually the play reads much more like the histories. In fact, a lot of the tragic elements are not even clear. So, in most instances, the psychology of the characters is secondary to their life philosophies, to their political views. And so we're going to be dealing a lot with life philosophies and political viewpoints and how they relate to spiritual evolution of consciousness, and not so much on psychology. This doesn't mean that there isn't something mythical in the play, or that there isn't something psychological in the makeup of the characters, because there certainly is, but it is not as prominent. And since this series of talks has parallels between the plays and a spiritual theme, there is not so much interweaving this time. And we'll be dealing more with parallels and having few questions about whether Shakespeare is meaning to say thus and thus or not. So there will be some of those references, but not a lot. We don't want to read anything into the words of Shakespeare or say that he was saying something that he wasn't, that has no integrity to it, and then the things that you do say that are worthwhile are tarnished by that. So we're going to treat it pretty much as a history and slightly as a tragedy, no matter what the title says. And it's a most unique play among all of the plays of Shakespeare. There is hardly another play that doesn't have a clown or a jester or some kind of person that is a silly person. And despite that omission, the play doesn't drag. It isn't heavy or depressive, and it's because there's so much action and such a wide range of characters that you're carried along despite the fact that you don't have that levity. So, rather than spending the whole night introducing what we're going to do and not do, it's probably better to do it. We'll get through the first act tonight, which will be further than we've ever gotten in one talk, and maybe next time we can get through an act and a half. The first scene is has two tribunes, Flavius and Marulus, and tribunes are supposed to be public defenders. They stand between the common people and the government. And but in this case, Flavius and Marulus are actually goading the citizens. They're not their defenders and they're not their protectors. They're trying to get them off of the streets and back into their homes or back into their workshops. Even though it is the festival of Lupercalia, the tribunes don't want the people celebrating because the people are wanting to celebrate Caesar, who has recently defeated Pompey in a civil war. That he won was everything. Already the Roman Empire was probably near the point where it was going into decline. And when a society is going into decline, they don't stick with the underdog. They always want to stick with the winner. The Civil War was probably actually started by Caesar. It was a triumvirate government between Pompey and Crassus and Julius Caesar. And they divided up the empire as it was known at that time, the borders of it. And Caesar didn't like the constraints of the land that was given to him, and so he crossed the river Rubicon, which is the Red River. And we know in the cowboy movies that when you cross the Red River, you're going into somebody else's territory. That always starts a big feud. There was a great cowboy movie when I was growing up. It was called The Red River. I still remember parts of it to this day. So, the other triumvirs raised arms against Caesar, and they were defeated. The tribunes were obviously concerned about the high and mighty Caesar and the breakup of the balance of power, and that can be seen in lines 35 through 70. Let's see. No, right around line 70. Flavius says, it's no matter, let no images be hung with Caesar's trophies. I'll be about and drive away the vulgar from the streets. So do you too. Where you perceive them thick, these growing feathers plucked from Caesar's wing will make him fly an ordinary pitch. Who else would soar above the view of men and keep us all in servile fearfulness? So they're concerned about Caesar flying too high for them, and to some extent they're repulsed by the crowd enthusiasm and by the civil war, and they may even have some remaining sympathies for Pompey, as it says in earlier lines around line 31. Flavius asked, wherefore art thou not in thy shop today? Why dost thou lead these men about the streets? And the cobbler says that we want to rejoice for Caesar and his triumph. And Marula says, what rejoice? What conquests brings he home? What tributaries follow him to Rome, to grace in captive bonds his chariot wheels? You blocks, you stones, you worse than senseless things, you hard hearts, you cruel men, knew ye not Pompey? Many a time and oft have you climbed to the walls and battlements, to towers and windows, yea, to chimney tops, your infants in your arms, and there have sat the livelong day with patient expectation to see great Pompey pass the streets of Rome. And when you saw his chariot but appear, have you not made a universal shout that Tiber trembled underneath their banks to hear the replication of your sounds made in her concave shores? And do you now put on your best attire? And do you now call out a holiday? And do you now strew flowers in his way that comes in triumph over Pompey's blood? Begone! Run to your houses, fall on your knees, pray to the gods to intermit the plague that needs must light on this ingratitude. So there clearly are some sympathies there for Pompey, as well as discontents with Caesar. The feast of the Lupercal has the name wolf right within it. It was a feast of wolf worship or wolf propitiation. Some historians think that it goes all the way back to the founding of Rome by Romulus and Remus. They were the mythical founders of the city of Rome, and they were supposedly suckled by a she-wolf. We're not going to go into it because it's not germane to what we're talking about, but this is a common mythical theme. The truth-seeking waltz songs, the children of Mercury, were also called wolflings, and that is that they were raised by the wolf. It has a little relevance to what we're trying to get at, so we will pass up that temptation. Some people saw the Lupercalia as propitiation of wolves by shepherds. It was a celebration in which at least one goat, but usually several goats, were sacrificed, and one dog was sacrificed. And then one or so young men wore nothing but the skins of the sacrifice and ran around the Palatine. And in their hands they had strips of goat leather. And what they did as they ran along is they slapped people with the strips of goat leather, goat skin. And the effect of that was supposed to be purification, fertility, and propitiation to the wolves. Again, this harkens to initiatory ideas, because undergoing pains and relieving the bound up destiny that one has in consequences and feeling the pains of them was always part of the initiatory work. Even to this day, when one is initiated and leaves the body for the first time, they have the experience that one has at death, and the whole life is seen backwards, and one experiences a miniature purgatory right in the initiation, bearing as much of your past as you can bear, because you need to release the soul power that is bound up in not only in memories, but it's bound up in various entities from clustering together certain types of thoughts and feelings, because those thoughts and feelings are live. So there's a tremendous amount of energy, soul power, that is available to someone if they can dissolve those things from the past. The idea of slapping people with leather thongs producing fertility is also not based completely on superstition. It turns out that a lot of infertility can be overcome when there is a threat on one's life. It is that otherwise stingy reproductive capabilities are loosed up for the saving or the progression of the species. It even works if you have a nut tree, and your nut tree is about 5 or 6 years old, which is not an uncommon thing, that the nut tree will not bear any nuts. And so what you can do is you go out and you get a big hefty rope, and you go out and you beat the tree with the rope, and it feels threatened. And in its survival urges, it goes into reproductive mode, and it starts bearing fruit after that. It's not a very kind thing to do to a tree, but people who are greedy to get fruit as quickly as they can will do that. So Flavius and Marullus decide to break up the whole thing, and they undeck all of the images that have Caesar's ornaments on it. And we see the beginnings of, among the aristocrats, some concern about the Caesar becoming too strong, and they feel that they're going to be left out. The part of the opening scene that we wish to look at is obviously the most obscure. In this talk, we look at nothing but, in these talks, we look at nothing but obscurities. In line 7, Marullus says, "Where is thy leather apron and thy rule? What dost thou with thy best apparel on? You, sir, what trade are you in?" And then the guy goes on to say very circumspectly that he is a mender of souls, and that is a cobbler. And then later on in the section that we read, he calls them nothing but rude blocks of stone. You blocks, you stones, you worse than senseless things. It so happens that in the very opening of every Masonic temple and opening of Masonic initiations, people are charged to wear their leather aprons. And they're charged to bring out their 24-inch rules. And in the process of initiation, people are taken from being rough blocks of stone to becoming statuary or becoming parts of a temple by being polished and formed into usable stone. So what's happening here is Shakespeare is taking amazing little coincidences that are exactly synchronous with the Masonic ritual, and he's putting them right in the text of his play. He does this, it carries on where the guy says his profession is a mender of souls. Now, most people think that this is a rude guy trying to make a pun. And really, what the work of Masonry is stated, they are called redeemers of souls. And Masonry is extremely democratic. And the second pun, where the shoemaker says he lives by the awl, the pun on A-L-L is, he also says that he is not a trader or a woman, meaning to say he is a builder, and he is a masculine builder, which is the way the Freemasons always referred to themselves. So he is indeed a builder of souls. Now, Shakespeare does the same thing in Henry VI. I don't know whether it's in part 1, part 2, or part 3, but he takes things exactly in that play from Freemasonry. And so every time that Shakespeare does this, it is wise to keep the eyes open to look for Freemasonic themes, because they're going to be in the play, and Shakespeare was most clearly aware of spiritual Masonry, and he's telling you outright almost from the opening line that he's going to do this. We remember that all of the action in this play happens around March. This is when the sun is in the east, and all Masonic lodges are opened, with the activity being in the east. So we'll try to keep our eyes open to what's going on. In scene 2, the scene opens with Caesar and his train around him, and they're probably somewhere in the area of the Palatine, because Mark Antony is going to be wearing the goat skins or the dog skin, and he's going to be doing the run. And Caesar tells his wife Calpurnia, make sure that you get in Antony's path so that he can hit you when he goes by. And it is implied that Calpurnia is barren, but it is done in such a way that you're not so sure that it isn't perhaps Caesar that is sterile, because he's so concerned about wanting to have an heir. He never did have an heir. He eventually had to adopt. So the scene also has, as Caesar is passing toward the area of the run, it has the area with the soothsayer telling Caesar to beware of the Ides of March. Now, the Roman calendars were rather sloppy affairs. They varied all the way between having 10 to 13 months. In the early Republic, or in the early days of the foundation of Rome, they had a 10-sign zodiac. And various different governments tried to unify all of the calendars, and they had problems because people were stuck in the old ways, and they didn't know how to have a calendar that was both solar and lunar and solely lunar, and so they had all kinds of difficulties with that. In the old calendar, they had several kinds of marker days, and the early markers that marked the early part of the month were called norns, and the secondary parts that would be right before and right after the middle of the months were called calends, C-A-L-E-N-D-S, and that is where our word calendar comes from. It's actually from the Romans using it that way. I know you probably have some Sanskrit thing about the origin of calendars, but yeah. And there were the Ides, and the Ides were usually about the center of the months. In actual history, Caesar, even though he was somewhat skeptical, was not totally against astrology. And he himself tried to reform the calendar, and he had his calendar he got mostly from the Egyptians, but he kept it, he never did anything about leap years, and finally the calendar got way out of sync. It was more than just a soothsayer that predicted the Ides of March. If you look into the history of astrology, quite a few different astrologers had very complex and elaborate predictions on the basis of the rising of certain stars, synchronous with the setting of certain other stars, and with Caesar's horoscope, which was always a fascination because Caesar was born to Caesarean birth. And so they had a reasonably accurate horoscope for Caesar, and together with star lore, it was an amazingly complex thing. I don't even know how they got those predictions from that kind of data, but they did. And it was more than somebody just yelling in the street, "Beware the Ides of March." That was just the period at the end. There was a whole bunch of things that went before it. We'll have a few stories along the way about the use of astrology in Rome because Rome was just filled with it. You know that a lot of the astrological terms that we use now in astrology actually came from the chariot races that one astrologer was trying to get an advantage over the other by bringing in more information and being able to predict with greater accuracy who was going to win the chariot races. But anyway, in this scene, what happens is everybody leaves to go and see the run, but Brutus and his brother-in-law Cassius. Cassius asks Brutus why he isn't going to the run. And he declines in slightly self-deprecatory terms along around line... I'm going to do quite a bit of reading in this part. Along around line 28. I am not gamesome. I do lack some part of that quick spirit that is in Anthony. Let me not hinder you, Cassius. Let me not hinder, Cassius, your desires. I'll leave you. So he's somewhat self-deprecatory. And what happens is Cassius sees an opening. And, as soon as you say something bad about yourself, people are going to jump in and they're going to tell you, either you're all right or they're going to run their spiel on you. And Cassius does that. And he says, Brutus, I do observe you now of late. I have not from your eyes that gentleness and show of love that I was wont to have. You bear too stubborn and too strange a hand over your friend that loves you. Puts him immediately on the defensive and makes him feel guilty. And Brutus then begins to expand on all of that. Cassius, be not deceived if I have veiled my look. I turn the trouble of my countenance merely upon myself. Vexed I am of late with passions of some difference, conceptions only proper to myself, which gives some soil perhaps to my behaviors. But let not therefore my good friends be grieved, among which number Cassius be you one, nor construe any further my neglect than that poor Brutus with himself at war forgets the shows of love to other men. So he's starting to open up. He's been put on the defensive, and he responds with a very defensive speech. And Cassius sees his magnified introspection, because that's exactly what he's describing, and he knows its vulnerability. And he asks Brutus, Then, Brutus, I must mistook your passion, by means whereof this breast of mine hath buried thoughts of great value, worthy congratulations. Tell me, good Brutus, can you see your face? He's starting to engage him. And he's starting to be very subtle about it. And Brutus, of course, says no. And Cassius says, "'Tis just. And it is very much lamented, Brutus, that you have no such mirrors as will turn your hidden worthiness into your eye, that you may see your shadow. I have heard where many of best respect in Rome, except immortal Caesar, speaking of Brutus and groaning underneath this age's yoke, have wished that noble Brutus had his eyes." So he's a little bit of flattery, but he's telling him, like you've got a responsibility here. Brutus is, of course, suspicious. "Into what dangers would you lead me, Cassius, that you would have me seek into myself for that which is not in me?" And so he's aware that he's being played, but he looks inward for his answer. That's where his problem comes in, is he's way too inward. As we see, Cassius comes out and says, "Therefore, good Brutus, be prepared to hear, and since you know you cannot see yourself so well as by reflection, I, your glass, will modestly discover to yourself that of yourself which you yet know not of. And be not jealous on me, gentle Brutus, were I a common laughter, or did use to stale with ordinary oaths my love to every new protester, if you know that I do fawn on men and hug them hard and after scandal of them, and if you know that I profess myself in banqueting to all the rout, then hold me dangerous." So he immediately clears himself right away and starts playing on him and plays on him very hard. He says, "I'm going to tell you what I see." And at this point, they're interrupted by cheers in the distance. And Brutus says he fears that the people are choosing Caesar as their king. Cassius sees now that Brutus is open, and he seizes on the word fears and asks why he would not have Caesar as a king. And Brutus says, "I would not, Cassius, yet I love him well. But wherefore do you hold me here so long? What is it you would impart to me? If it be aught toward the general good, set honor in one eye and death in the other, and I'll look on both indifferently. For let the gods so speed me, as I love the name of honor more than I fear death." So he's showing one of the chief ingredients to tragic personalities. He's showing an extreme pride. Apparently, Shakespeare doesn't like introverts because they always come out looking bad in Shakespeare. And Brutus still balks at being played with the whole idea of fear, but he's suspecting that he's being played on, but he shows that he's a real idealist, and he shows it with a stoic type of character. Let's see. Let's read the next Cassius speech. I'm spending a lot of time on this because it's a very important passage to the whole play. I know that virtue to be in you, Brutus, as well as I know your outward favor. Well, honor is the subject of my story. I cannot tell what you and other men think of this life, but for a single self, I had as lief not be as be in awe of such a thing as I myself. I was born free as Caesar, so were you. We have both fed as well, and we can both endure the winter's cold as well as he. For once upon a raw and gusty day, the troubled Tiber chafing with her shores, Caesar said to me, "Darest thou, Cassius, now leap in with me into this angry flood, and swim to yonder point?" Upon the word, accounted as I was, I plunged in and bade him follow. So indeed he did. The torrent roared, and we did buffet it with lusty sinews, throwing it aside and stemming it with hearts of controversy. But ere we could arrive at the point proposed, Caesar cried, "Help me, Cassius, or I sink. I, as Aeneas, our great ancestor, did from the flames of Troy upon his shoulder the old Anchises bear, so from the waves of Tiber did I the tired Caesar. And this man is now become a god, and Cassius a wretched creature, and must bend his body. If Caesar carelessly, but not on him. If he had a fever when he was in Spain, and when the fit was on him, I did mark how he did shake. 'Tis true, this god did shake. His coward lips did from their color fly, and that same eye whose bend doth awe the world did lose his luster. I did hear him groan, aye, that tongue of his that bade the Romans mark him and write his speeches into their books. Alas, it cried, give me some drink, tinnitus. As a sick girl, ye gods, it doth amaze me, a man of such feeble temper should get the start of the majestic world and bear the palm alone." So he has now very much started by working on Brutus's sense of honor and Brutus's whole ideal of everyone being equals, playing on that and showing then the weakness, the very great human weakness of Caesar, and then calls on Aeneas and Anchises and all of the past history of Rome, and it's a really sweeping and cunning reply. It has flattery in it, and it has the ideal of freedom and the ideal of friendship, and it's all of the weaknesses of Caesar that are brought to the fore in the speech. They're interrupted again by another shout, which is again noted by Brutus, and Brutus says, another shout, "I do believe that these applauses are for some new honors heaped on Caesar." And Cassius again takes off, and he says, "Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings. Brutus and Caesar, what should be in that Caesar? Why should that name be sounded more than yours? Write them together, yours is as fair a name. Sound them, it doth become the mouth as well. Weigh them, it is as heavy. Conjure 'em, Brutus will start a spirit as soon as Caesar. Now, in the names of all the gods at once, upon what meat doth this our Caesar feed that he is grown so great? Age, thou art shamed. Rome, thou hast lost the breed of noble bloods." He's going back, like people used to be much better in the olden days. "When went there by an age since the great flood, but it was feigned with more than one man? When could they say till now that talked of Rome, that her wide walks encompassed but one man? Now it is Rome indeed, and room enough, when there is in it but one man. Oh, you and I have heard our fathers say, there was a Brutus once that would have brooked the eternal devil to keep his state in Rome as easily as a king." So what has happened is he's played again on Brutus' defensiveness. And Brutus says he isn't jealous of Caesar, but he's worked up now. He admits to his concerns about the state coming under one head, and he will say nothing more about it. He says the time is not right to talk about it now. And just then Caesar and his company comes by, and Caesar says to Mark Antony, "Let me have men about me that are fat, sleek-headed men, and such as sleep o' nights. Yon Cassius has a lean and hungry look. He thinks too much. Such men are dangerous." Antony says, "Fear him not, Caesar. He's not dangerous. He is a noble Roman and well given." Caesar says, "Would he were fatter, but I fear him not. Yet if my name were liable to fear, I do not know the man I should avoid so soon as that spare Cassius. He reads much, he is a great observer, and he looks quite through the deeds of men. He loves no plays, as thou dost, Antony. He hears no music, as thou dost, Antony. Or seldom he smiles, and smiles of such a sort as if he mocked himself, and scorned his spirit that could be moved to smile at anything. Such men as he be never at heart's ease, whilst they behold a greater than themselves, and therefore they are very dangerous. I rather tell thee what is to be feared than what I fear, for I am always Caesar. Come on my right hand, for this ear is deaf. And tell me what you think of him." When Caesar and Antony and that train has passed, they corner Casca and they ask him what has transpired. And Casca is a very excitable man, and he graphically describes the with extremely uncomplimentary terms about the calling the people the rabble and what happens. He says how when the shouts went up for Caesar, the stench of their breath and of their sweat caused Caesar to swoon. And Brutus says, well, that's Caesar's falling sickness, which means epilepsy. And then Cassius is right there. He says, it is not Caesar that has the falling sickness, but us, meaning to say that Caesar's ascent is going to mean their decline. Casca relates how the crown was offered to Caesar, and that after he had fainted or swooned, he offers his throat to the crowd as a sacrifice to cover for himself. And he says he checks to see whether he has said anything untoward, and he asks their forgiveness, which they're only too willing to give. And the whole story of how 3 times the crown was offered and 3 times Caesar pushed it away, but each time a little less vigorously. And finally everybody leaves but Cassius, and Cassius finally tells his real intent. Speaking to himself, he says, "Well, Brutus, thou art noble, yet I see thy honorable metal may be wrought from that it is disposed. Therefore it is meet that noble minds keep ever with their likes. For who so firm that cannot be seduced? Caesar doth bear me hard, but he loves Brutus. If I were Brutus now, and he were Cassius, he should not humor me. I will this night in several hands in at his window throw, as if they came from several citizens, writings all tending to the great opinion that Rome holds of his name, wherein obscurely Caesar's ambition shall be glanced at. And after this, let Caesar seat him sure, for we will shake him or worse days endure." As clever and well designed as this scene is, it is very difficult for me to understand. In some ways, it's difficult to understand what Shakespeare is trying to accomplish. You could say that Shakespeare was trying to explore the consciousness of otherwise noble people and try to understand what would bring him to conspiracy. But the faults of Caesar are so exaggerated that it seems almost biased on the part of Shakespeare. It seems biased that could excite disdain and jealousy, because he makes Caesar look very, very bad. And on top of that, not all of the conspirators were jealous, especially Brutus. His conspiratorial mind was not moved to throwing over Caesar at this point, and I don't think that's maybe part of the answer of why Caesar looks so bad, but I don't think that's all of the answer. And on top of that, Shakespeare is very rarely experimental in his plays. His thought is clearly defined before he even creates a character, and he isn't doing it on the way. Another thesis that you could put forth is to say that Brutus is a tragic hero who succumbs to his own blindness before his tragic fall. And that's true. You can see that he's struggling with himself and he's struggling with his ideal, and he has, by his own statement, a lot of pride. But Brutus is pretty clever. At least three places along the way, Brutus can see that he's being worked by Cassius, and he's wary, and he doesn't like what's going on. And he's not giving himself to the glaring hyperbole that Casca puts out. So these characters are much more subtle characters than Leontes in A Winter's Tale. Brutus is, it's not enough to say that this is all, that the decline, or speaking of the weaknesses of Caesar's character, is all to bring Brutus to a tragic fall, because that isn't what causes him to fall in the first place. So I suspect that there is indeed a bias on the part of Shakespeare. I believe that Shakespeare has his own political axe to grind. By stating from the get-go that this is a Masonic play, Masons were revolutionaries. And the Masons, following back into all the roots of Masonry, right back into Gnosticism, they found dignity in each individual, and they wanted democracy. The Masons pride themselves in the fact that each and every person who came into Masonry was equal to each other person. And at one time, the King of England, in order to be initiated into Masonry, had to go and appear before a lowly blacksmith in order to be initiated. And so I think what Shakespeare is trying to do here is he's trying to set up some kind of an attitude of democracy, and he's trying to put forth that kind of case. And in showing the failings of Caesar, and in showing he's trying to show he's an ordinary man like everyone else, and having the regalistic character is not right, because we're all humans, is what we're saying. But if you think about this line of thought, then why would he describe in several instances, like in the first scene and the second scene, why would he describe the crowd so badly as rabble? Literally uses the word rabble. He's viewing them as the hoi polloi, the general populace that has nothing to offer. But if you look very carefully, every statement about the derogatory nature, very clever way of showing that it is the aristocrats, whether they be part of the conspiracy or whether they be part of the ambitions of Caesar to be king. In all cases, the crowd is seen by aristocrats as being the rabble. So it's there might be other interpretations, but I have never drawn a full understanding of this scene. And so if any of you have any other ideas of why it develops the way it does, I'm open to hearing them at any time. You can get up and shout them out in class if you like. All right. Let's return to the closing speech of Cassius and try to understand this a little better, because he is, after all, the main person of the speech. He's saying, well, Brutus, thou art noble, yet I see thy honored metal may be wrought from what it is disposed. Therefore it is meet that noble minds ever keep with their likes. For who so firm that cannot be seduced? Caesar doth bear me hard, but he loves Brutus. If I were Brutus now and he were Cassius, he should not humor me. I will this night, and talking about shaking him and weakening him. Earlier, we noted that Brutus was introspective. But being introspective is different from the introversion of Leontes. It's different in degree, and it's different in quality. Clearly, Brutus is not out of it the way Leontes was. He's not of that great a degree so that he's mentally ill. He's not pathological. He has some blindnesses, and he is somewhat projective, but he is not pathological. He's an idealist, and the world never matches up to idealism. And when one performs in the world, one is subject to all the limitations of the world, and with those limitations before an ideal, a person never comes out feeling good about himself. And he is concerned about that the world doesn't go to his philosophical and political ideals. He wants something more democratic. And so he's deliberating his own faults, and he's deliberating the faults of the society at the same time. And so he is in a upsettable state. The quality of his introspection is different than Leontes also. Leontes was outright a feeler. He got all sorts of fantastic images, pictures in his consciousness. But Brutus is clearly a thinker. He tries to think from ideals. So he's so involved with his thinking activity that he's not in touch with his intuition. And the intuition comes from the same source of his ideals. This is one thing that all mental people suffer from. And that is, one does not make decisions by the mind. The mind can provide information, and it can organize it, and it can present the information to the thinker, to the spirit, so that the spirit can make decisions on the basis of spiritual intuition, spiritual truth. The mind is the servant of the spirit, but it's also the servant of the lower nature. So there's always a division when you're working with the mind. The mind, by not only because the higher and the lower nature have access to it, is not a fit vehicle, but just in general, the mind is not a fit vehicle for making decisions. If the decision-making capacity is placed with the mind will consider more and more points of view, and it'll weigh and balance, and then it'll add more points of view, and it'll never come to a decision. But it's not what it is designed for. The design of the mind is to be a servant. So if a person is caught in the mind and deliberating and weighing and introspectively so that there is some doubt about the personality relative to the higher nature, that person is easily put off balance by a person of action. And Cassius is clearly a person of action. And Brutus is smart enough to know that he's being worked, but because the mind gets engaged And the engagement of the mind is directed toward a conclusion stated in terms that are appealing to Brutus, that the mind can't get the greater picture. Whereas if the mind were more in the hands of the spirit, of the thinker, he would be able to see through Brutus and know what was going on. So, with that in mind, it's important to look at the relationship of Brutus and Cassius with regard to the philosophies of life, and how these philosophies of life fit in with the whole evolution of consciousness, because this is, of course, about mysticism. And so we'll do that. Now, this scene, even though I don't understand it fully, is a masterpiece as far as the way these speeches are put down. Because the words that are used by Cassius and Brutus are exactly the kinds of words that people with their life philosophies and political philosophies would use. So this shows great insight of Shakespeare into a knowledge of ancient philosophy. So when you consider the two philosophies of Cassius and Brutus, in terms of time and history, the philosophy of Cassius is more advanced than the philosophy of Brutus. However, the philosophy of Brutus has more future potential than that of Cassius. Cassius was a skeptic, and a skeptic following along the lines of the school of Pyrrhon. Now, ancient skepticism in the times of Greece and Rome is not like our modern skepticism. Our modern skepticism is negative. It says that thing, it just doesn't say that we don't know, it says it's not so. There's something in our materialism that is outright negative. The ancient skeptics believed that knowledge, objective knowledge, was impossible. All we have is our immediate experience from our senses, which is subjective. Therefore, it isn't really knowledge. It didn't negate any other philosophical systems, but it rejected them all belief systems, all philosophical systems, not because they couldn't possibly be true, but because we just didn't know. And that's the kind of skepticism that was prevalent more in Rome than it was in Greece. So the skepticism was to suspend judgment. Now, if you think about this, this is the philosophy of a fully incarnate consciousness. The spirit is completely engaged in the physical body so that there is almost a forgetting of the spiritual nature. One places all values in the senses, and there is no remnant of an ancient clairvoyance. Hence, there's no belief in psychic phenomena or supernatural phenomena or anything of that nature. With no spiritual intimations, no things to cause a belief in something beyond the physical, like Cassius, all of the skeptics became highly pragmatic, very practical people. And as we can see, like from that last speech, they weren't restrained by the hitches of ideals. Most of the other schools didn't have that same expediency that skeptics did. As far as we have proceeded in the play, we see that Cassius is not an evil person. Ambitious Yes, he's ambitious and manipulative. Yes, but not evil. He's not like someone that just tries to do nastiness and revels in it, and somebody that is without human feelings. It's just that to the skeptics, evil was as intolerable as good if it wasn't efficient. If it didn't appeal to the senses, it wasn't worthwhile. Stoicism, in its place in the evolution of consciousness, precedes skepticism. If we study the history of humanity over the last 6,000 years, we can see that there is a clear progression such that the further one goes back in history, the less incarnate the spiritual consciousness was, the less it was engaged in the physical world. There was not that great involvement in matter, and control and creativity within matter was not a very common thing. A few people had it, but not many. The mystical seers that seemed to be worth their while claimed that going back in the memory of nature all the way back to the beginning of our human origins, claimed that at that beginning our consciousness was completely inward. In fact, we didn't even really know that we had an outward or physical nature at all, and except by extremities like being burned to death or carnal knowledge, we didn't know that there was something outside. So in the societies preceding Greece and Rome, such as in Babylon, not only was the inwardness greater, but the philosophical outlook was more inward. For example, most of the astrology and the spiritual practices of Babylon in pre-Grecian times was divinatory. Like they sacrificed animals, or even the astrology was divinatory. Sacrificed animals and cut their innards apart and saw some kind of reflection of natural cycles as they built things up in the liver. And from those reflections they could tell sort of what the future was. The whole attitude of astrology and mysticism was, let me get back to what the gods want. It was a negative sign in the age of Taurus, which means that the priests were stronger, whereas in the age of Aries, the scientists and philosophers became stronger. And so the people under the control of the priests were even more dedicated in faith to getting back to what the gods wanted. And so they looked for things to how they could be obedient to the spiritual consciousness that they were losing. For them, the golden age was in the past. In Greece and Rome, which developed in the Aries age, when the philosophers and scientists were stronger, individualism was becoming more the thing. The more the invisible ties that bind us all together, the common unity of all humanity as one group, that inward perception was drifting away, and as we came more into our bodies, individualism became stronger and stronger and stronger. So, in order to induce people to strengthen their individualism and to come into the material world so that the spirit could become completely waking in its consciousness in the material world, Stoicism was brought in as a philosophy. The Stoics believed that it was not the events in life that made the difference between a philosophical versus an unphilosophical life. The Stoics believed that everybody's going to have illnesses and everybody's going to lose people to death and everybody has to die. The Stoics were very suicidal. And they said what differs the life of a philosophical person to a non-philosophical person is the way they take those events. So they were not cringing about pains and sorrows. This is why Brutus says, give me an ideal and give me a death in either of my eyes, and I'll treat them equally. I'm proud. I'm not afraid to die. I'll step forward and step right into death. So this is why they had their view about astrology. A lot of the Romans that were Stoics studied astrology, but they didn't study it the divine as the Babylonians did. They studied it to understand what their fate was, and so that then they could meet their fate with equanimity and with the dignity that a person is supposed to have. And this was just what was necessary to bring people into the physical body that much. One of the emperors, Domitian, the son of Vespasian, studied astrology, and he knew on what day he was going to die, and he knew he was going to die by a conspiracy, and conspiracies after Caesar became much more frequent. They became much more nasty and less based on idealism. But Domitian said, the moon is in Aquarius. My assassins are coming for me now. He knew right down to the day. And so he ate his dinner with his friends, and he said, well, the hour is past, so maybe I misread and I can open the doors. And he opens the doors, and the conspirators come in and kill him. But he knew it, but he didn't cringe or he didn't beg for his life. This is why the statement by Cassius, knowing that he himself was a skeptic, but knowing that Brutus was a Stoic, this is why he could play on Brutus and say, the fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. So it did bring us into full incarnate state. We still used the ancient astrology to get pictures of what was coming, but not so much to try to go back to a golden age, but to proceed forward to what our destiny was. So we had to fall into materialism. We had to carry that fall all the way out, or there was never any hope of us becoming divine creators. As long as we held back, which Brutus is tending to do in his tentativeness, in his stoical introspection, he is holding back a little bit from diving in, and there's no hope of fulfilling evolution as a creator unless you do dive in. Cassius is much more like our times than like Roman times, because Cassius is fully incarnate and he's blinded and he's skeptical about everything and uses everything to his own end. So the problem is in our time is that too many people think like Cassius. We're much too expedient. We're much too personally, individualistically ambitious, and that is no longer pro-evolutionary. Because the world, as fine as it is now, is not enough. It's not enough to satisfy the spirit. Yes? Yeah, that's...
Because in essence, what it comes down to is that Cassius is an ancient. He's an early version of the proto-fascists.
Yes.
And not that he doesn't believe in the position. It's just that he could say again that these
Yeah,
Why?
yeah. Yes, I understand that, and I agree with that, but I'm still not. There's still something more I'm looking for yet. It may take a few more years, and then it'll dawn on me. But at any rate, so we want something more than the material world. We want to fulfill our divine destiny. However, unlike the Babylonians, we realize we can't go back. We can't go back to divination. We can't go back to being Stoics. We have to go forward, and that brings up the question, what is forward? What does it mean? It can't be denying the external world or the material world or eschewing it, because if that's the case, then we really haven't experienced it. When something has been experienced, you can't say that it doesn't exist. When you experience something, you know it. And especially having such magnificent physical bodies, we can't say that, that we'd like to go back to something more primitive. So what it is we have to follow through, almost like in a baseball swing or in a golf swing. It's not just enough to make contact, which is what we do now. We make contact with the physical world. We need to follow through and carry the arc back into the spiritual worlds. And it's not going back to the way it was before. And it certainly isn't dabbling in all kinds of phenomenalism, like psychic experiences and things like that, because that's not satisfying either. And we can't do it as innocent creatures. We can't be led by the hierarchies or pushed by the hierarchies from behind. Now that we're incarnate and we have awakened to self-consciousness, we have to deepen that self-consciousness. And we have to expand it, and we have to feel fulfilled creatively through the outer world and back into the inner worlds. We cannot deny our creative responsibilities. So it is only in creative participation, in creative service, that we can satisfy our inner spiritual beings. So we have to take the step beyond Cassius. We can have idealism, but not the same kind of idealism that Brutus has. We have idealism that gives us intimations of something better in the future if we can only work our way through what is now restraining us, or if we can develop a subtlety that passes through the grossness of dense matter and with that subtlety see through to what is behind matter. All of the things of material science now, even though a lot of them are empty abstractions, are very good because there is a looking for an invisible meaning that is behind external phenomena. So it looks like we have to develop something different. All of the ranting and raving that we've just gone through here, I didn't at least pound my fist in my hand, is echoed in the action of scene 3. It is a theme that comes up numerous times in Shakespeare in differing ways, that momentous moments in human history are paralleled by or accompanied by or portended by prodigious natural phenomena, such as storms and things like that. In scene 3, we see that there is an unusually strong storm. A storm that is dark enough so that the owls come out in the daytime. But the owl is a portent of something more than just darkness. In the Mediterranean areas, the owl is always the symbol of something bearing evil or something bearing black magic. meaning to say that something dark is going to be brought right out into the open. A storm center is a vortex. And as a vortex, it is a concentration of energy of great magnitude. It is in vortices that transformations in nature that are almost alchemically accomplished are brought about. Things can be changed. Sand by lightning can even be turned into glass. And ball lightning can wreak horrendous destruction as it blows up. So what we're talking about is in the concentrated energetic vortex that the veil between the physical and etheric realms is made thinner. In fact, in all of the realms between the physical and the purely spiritual realms, in those realms which are so fluidic, the vortex is the basic form of all forms. In fact, a lot of ancient Greek sophists taught that the vortex was the body of God, such that, what's his name in The Birds, when he's making fun of Socrates, he says that Socrates calls the newest god vortex. Socrates never said that. But we have it from the biblical Exodus, that Jehovah leading the people out into the wilderness appeared either as a whirlpool of fire or a whirlpool of smoke. And if we think of the whirlpools or the vortices that are great nebulae, that are great galaxies, it isn't so far-fetched to think that this is a form that represents the outward nature of God. This is a very large subject, and even though I was tempted to get into it, I just want to talk about one aspect of it. And to that, we have to talk about one little New Age pop culture thing. It's called ionization. And the ionization in vortices is relevant to the way the term is used in physics and chemistry, but only distantly. The pop culture tells us that negative ions, so to speak, are found either in polar air or in desert air are good for us, and that if we buy negative ion generators, those little machines that you plug in and they spew ions out into your health will improve and stay better. I don't have a final statement about those machines, but I do know that from nature, my experience does go along with these claims. If I'm ever going to be ill, it's going to be in low pressure when there is positive ion, what they call positive ion anyway, activity in the air. When it is frigidly cold, or if I'm in the desert where that dry air is coming down from the region up near the ionosphere, my body just thrills to that kind of air. I don't think I've ever been ill under high ionization cold air. Now, it's not universally true, because there are some people that are positive ion people. That is, they thrive in low pressure and icky, sticky weather. I happened to be married to one at one time. It was like a Jack Sprat can eat no fat kind of situation. Nothing wrong with it. It was just that it's a minority of people that are positive ion, low pressure people. So if we take this whole idea, as Shakespeare does, and carries it one step further, it seems to intimate that not only magical phenomena, but very strange, bizarre natural phenomena, and even negative, nasty things in human affairs, like conspiracies, are precipitated when there is an exceptionally deep, low pressure, and that the ionization is positive ionization, and it brings out the negativity in people. I, for one, I don't know about the moral side of it, but I do know that black magic is much more likely in icky, sticky climates than it is in dry climates. And I do know that people who see tornadoes see a yellowish green in the air right before the tornado, which is like some people who are beginning to open up a theory of clairvoyance see. They see that same green, and you're sort of looking like through a veil of yellow-green light, and that's where you first see into the ethers, or one of the ways that you first see into the ethers. So in the third scene, we find the conspiracy is being forged at the same time that people are being struck by lightning and living, and lions are prowling through the streets of the city, and women who are more likely to sensitivity and clairvoyance are seeing men walking in glowing fire. And so what they're talking about is they're seeing etheric entities with the glow of light. So it's interesting how Shakespeare does these things. In fact, when we get to the Tempest, maybe next year, if we ever get that far, when we get to the Tempest, we see that this is a factor that is consciously used in magic. Anyway, the third scene, Casca comes on again, and in the second scene he expressed himself with frankness, and now we see that he's really an emotional extrovert. He's all excited, and in his excitement he describes everything that's going on, and along about line 4 through 44, are you not moved when all the sway of the earth shakes like a thing unfirm? O Cicero, I have seen tempests when the scolding wings have rived the knotty oaks, and I have seen the ambitious ocean swell and rage and foam to be exalted with the threatening clouds. But never till tonight, never till now, did I go through a tempest dropping fire. Either there is a civil strife in heaven, or else the world, too saucy with the gods, incenses them to send destruction. And a little further on he says, a common slave, you know him well by sight, held up his hand, which did flame and burn like 20 torches joined, and yet his hand, not sensible of fire, remained unscorched. Besides, I had not since put up my sword against the Capitol. I met a lion who gazed upon me and went surly by without annoying me. And there were drawn upon a heap 100 ghastly women, transformed with their fear, who swore they saw men all in fire walk up and down the streets. And yesterday the bird of night did sit, even at noonday, upon the marketplace, hooting and shrieking. When these prodigies do so conjointly meet, let not men say, these are their reasons, they are natural, for I believe they are portentous things unto the climate that they point upon. He observed well, but not a calm, impartial observer. On the other hand, Cicero, who was something of a humanist, and had a little bit of skeptic about him, he was an indifferent science, and he says things, good night in Casca, this disturbed sky is not to walk in. Or he says all sorts of things, that he's talking about. He's observing the human phenomena, and he's a little bit surprised by the superstition of it all. Cassius, on the other hand, is a skeptic, and he's totally unmoved by it, and he uses it again expediently to his advantage. He says, those that have known the earth so full of faults, for my part, I have walked the streets, submitting me to the perilous night. And thus unbraced Casca As you see, I have bared my bosom to the thunderstone, and when the cross-blue lightning seemed to open the breast of heaven, I did present myself even in the aim and very flash of it. And he says this is a proof of his virtue, and he uses his skepticism in that way. And he goes on to tell Casca, you are dull, Casca, and those sparks of light that should be in a Roman you do want, or else you use not. You look pale and gaze and put on fear and cast yourself in wonder to see the strange impatience of the heavens. But if you would consider the true cause, why all these fires, why all these gliding ghosts, why birds and beasts from quality and kind, why old men, fools, and children calculate, why all these things change from their ordinance, their natures, and performed faculties to monstrous quality, why you shall find that earth hath infused them with these spirits to make them instruments of fear and warning unto some monstrous state. Now could I, Casca, name to thee a man most like this dreadful night that thunders, lightnings, opens graves, and roars, and doth the lion in the Capitol, a man no mightier than myself or me in personal action, yet prodigious grown and fearful as these strange eruptions are. 'Tis Caesar, you mean? Is it not Cassius? So you can see when he's addressing an extrovert, an emotional extrovert, he takes a much different tone. He realized if he had spoken that way to Brutus, he wouldn't have gotten anywhere. Because, Brutus is sort of like a trembling, gentle flower, and he would have closed right up at those words. But when you have an extroverted emotionalist, you've got to crash through that. And he calls him a dullard right away from the beginning, and that he knows that that's the weak spot. That the person doesn't want to be seen as just an emotional person, and so he leads them on and to the, like Chard does with his Math for Dummies, to the point where all they have to do is punch the equal sign, and they and they have come to the right conclusion, and that's what he's done. He is very clever because he's subtle. When he's talking, he alludes to Pompey's porch, to meet there, because not only is it a convenient place for the conspiracy to meet, it recalls Pompey and civil war, who was just, Pompey, who was just destroyed by Caesar. And you can see again in Cassius all of that sensual sagacity, because he can tell when Cinna is coming. I can tell by the look, by the shape of the movement, that this is indeed Cinna. I can tell by his gait. And he is, in the final speech of the scene, he says, again speaking to himself, "Come, Casca, you and I yet ere the day see Brutus at his house. 3 parts of him is already ours, and the man entire upon our next encounter yields him ours." Meaning to say that he's calculated so well that he can see through, and he knows that he's already captured Brutus before he's actually brought him completely into conspiracy. That's as far as we'll go this time. And next time we'll try for maybe an act and a half, unless I get fetched away by something again. Any questions? Any statements? Yeah. Yes, but there is a statement that a lot is focused on the weakness of Caesar, and it's more than just Cassius's angling with it. Caesar is definitely, Shakespeare is definitely trying to break up the idea of divine kings. Because mind you, he was in that transition between the time when England was ruled completely by kings or queens until the time, as he writes of in King John, where the Magna Carta is, the Magna Carta is signed. And so he clearly was on the side of the people, and he didn't like the whole idea. He wanted as much as possible to get out the idea that there were no such things as divine kings, and that they were humans just like the rest of us. And he wanted to make sure that all the royals looked down on the common people as rabble, all of the aristocrats.
Among someone like Cassius, who is not likely to regard very highly, or
I understand what you're saying. Yes, but it's more than that. I wasn't in a rough talk like this. I cannot get sufficient sensitivity and subtlety to show what is always the development of Cassius' line of thought and what is going beyond it. But it's pretty clear that Shakespeare has an axe to grind in here. He's stating more than just the development of the play itself. Yes, this is a history, and it was predicted by more than one astrologer. In fact, it was sort of like a field game. That's happened several times in history. There was a Neoplatonistic school in Florence that the Medici ran, and there were a lot of great philosophers. Jerome Cardan came out of it, Nostradamus came out of it, and there was a man in that school called Picos de Meralda, and he belonged to the wing of that Neoplatonistic school that did not believe in astrology. And so all of the astrologers in the school took great joy in predicting the exact day of his death and reveling when they got it right. And that's happened several times in history, that people have predicted, a person, either somebody they didn't like or somebody who was a great historical figure. They predicted death. There are lots of, I forget all the names that were involved. Where was Vitius Valens, the famous astrologer in Roman times, that predicted about Caesar or not. And I got all the books, but I didn't take time to get into it. So, in fact, different emperors banned astrology because astrologers could be used as propaganda tools. They could be paid off to say that somebody has the horoscope of an emperor and use that to raise the sympathies of the people, and pretty soon there was a movement behind them. And even though it was all untrue, people believed in the astrologers that much publicly that Tiberius had his own pet astrologer and had all the other astrologers killed. And it's a most interesting story. He gave interviews for the position of astrologer to the emperor, which in much later times was called the Imperial Mathematicus. But he gave interviews on the Isle of Capri, which is just a stone right out of the Mediterranean, and has these steps that wind up. And Tiberius had, as the head of the Praetorian Guard, a man named Sejanus, who was a huge, big hulk of a man that was sort of like Ida Amendatta, who liked to choke men to death with his hands. But they gave interviews to astrologers, and if they didn't pass the test, Tiberius gave Sejanus the sign, and suddenly going down the steps, he would suddenly take a fall and end up being dashed into the Mediterranean or into the stones below. And the man who actually got the job made all kinds of predictions and had all kinds of knowledge about Tiberius that so wowed him that Tiberius asked him, "What does your own horoscope say?" And the guy starts calculating on his own horoscope, and he just blanches white, and he says, "It says that I'm in mortal peril." And because he was honest and knew himself well, he got the position, and all of the other astrologers in Rome were ordered, they were killed. most interesting. Any other questions, statements? No, that was his pet astrologer from then on in. Yeah, killed all the others but that one. He didn't want anybody starting a movement on him. Yeah. Yes. There have been a lot of kings and emperors that have had pet astrologers that way. If you like stories, Michael, you can leave anytime you wanna, but Michael the Scot was such an astrologer that this king was doing the same thing, trying to find a court astrologer. And Michael the Scot seemed to be almost impossibly accurate. And